This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we continue our review of The Chosen with a discussion on the 5th episode, The Wedding Gift.
Coming down the back half stretch here. Last 4 episodes of the season. And I am tired today, Brent Billings. You need to pick up my energy level. It's your responsibility. Get me going here. What's going on?
Well, I don't know actually how much energy we can have with this because this episode is incredibly dense. There's so many characters, so many like points of cultural context going on.
There is. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to have to power through this somehow.
No, there is. There's a lot of intersecting storylines. Absolutely.
So let's get right into it. Fire off that spoiler horn. So we begin in Jerusalem, and as I was watching it, the subtitle said 88, but then in the roundtable discussion with the consultants, one of them was saying, you know, a lot of people are probably going to have a problem with the fact that you pegged it at AD 12. So apparently they originally had it subtitled as AD 12 and then changed it later on.
Which would have been horrific because there's no way it's 12. Like no school of scholar, like there's no way that 0 corresponds to the birth of Jesus. In any historical timeline. So to have done 80-12 would have been a big mistake.
Well, and they discussed that a little bit. Some guy who like came up with the dating mechanism, you know, several hundred years after the fact, you know, like ignored some historical documents and assumed something or other. And so that's how the dates got off, and then they figured it out like 1,000 years later. In the 1600s, they figured out like, oh, actually, that's off by about 4 years.
Yeah, there's no running that back, you know that much. Yep.
So anyway, they fixed that. So I'm assuming I'm watching on a disc. I'm assuming the online version is also corrected. But yes, 88.
Yep, it was 88, and there's a 4 to 6 year gap depending on which train of thought you're looking at.
Not 88, but the year of our Lord. 8, just to be clear. So anyway, Mary comes in the scene. I don't think you realize immediately that it's her, but she's frantically looking for Jesus, and he ends up coming around the corner with Joseph, and they have a discussion about where he's been, and he's like, you know, of course I was with my father, and she's like, no, you weren't, and they kind of like gestured to the temple or whatever, and I'm like, oh, okay, and she's like, well, you know, whatever, and then the line that the young Jesus says, you know, if now is not my time, then when? If not now, when? And I'm like, oh man, and Mary, it's almost a fourth wall break. She's not looking quite into the camera, but very close. And she says, please. And, it's just kind of I don't know. The first time I watched it, I felt like the scene was a little bit clunky. The dialogue was a little bit like, I don't know if I want to peg it on the actor who was playing young Jesus or what, but it felt a little weird. But you know, it does come back later, so.
It does. Yeah, it was a good scene for that. They're setting up that callback at the very end of the episode, and that part I appreciated. I actually think at the end of the episode, if we remember to talk about it, there's actually a whole lot more going on there. I appreciate what they did artistically. Like, they set it up to where she can call back to this moment when he's younger, and that's the intimate mother-son. Like, because what you're trying to deal with on some level is, like, how is Mary able to, like, convince Jesus to do this miracle, and they do it in that artistic way, which I loved. And I wouldn't even say that those elements aren't potentially taking place. I kind of would love to squish the content I already had in my brain together with some of these beautiful artistic ideas. But it was I appreciated what they did there, and especially what they're having to work with as making an episode. That it worked.
Yeah, and the director was talking about like their struggle, like how much does Mary know? You know, how much does she defer to Jesus even when he's younger? How much does Jesus understand about what he's doing? So yeah, lots of like tension, lots of we don't quite know how things played out, and so I think it was a good balance of how they did things. I thought it was interesting that when Jesus was talking to Joseph, he referred to him as Abba, but then when he was talking about God, he used the English Father.
Yeah, and that was a weird interplay, but in the whole language, because they haven't been doing that. They haven't been like preserving some Hebrew expressions like that. So that was,
although they did use in episode 4, they used Ema for mom.
That's true. No, that's absolutely true. Now you say that, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and I do like how they've done the whole, how much did Mary know, like throughout this whole, this episode especially, but I like how they balance that, especially in the scene, even with Joseph as well. And I love, like, as this scene progresses, I love the moment where, like, Joseph, like, you think he's going to go in to scold Jesus, but there's like this like sense of, well, I can't scold him. So,
well, yeah.
Jesus, and he like kind of pauses. Please don't do that again.
This like moment of pride, this like, you should have seen him, like the scribes were like glued to what he was saying. He was teaching them, and like it's that thing where it's like, I really, you should be in trouble, but I'm also really impressed by what you did, so I can't,
Right. Yeah, absolutely on that part. But even when he goes to make that statement, there's this dramatic pause. It's a brief pause. But when he says, Jesus, don't do that again, there's this, like, it could have come off like an angry dad, like, don't do that again. But there's like this Jesus, like he's going to say it, and then he catches himself and, please don't, it's like more of a request than a scold. And then obviously as they're walking away, the joke of, and I love the word he uses, transgression, like, how will we, what am I to do to help you repay your mother for this transgression?
Yeah.
Which I thought, that's great. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Right.
Maybe rub her feet. And I thought, oh, clever callback. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So then we jump ahead to Cana, AD 26, and Dina steps out, and she's making preparations for her son's wedding. Her son is Asher. I don't think he ever speaks. He's just kind of in the background. You see him in a couple of scenes, but he never actually talks. And then Mary arrives, and turns out she's Dina's best friend, and she's there early to help out with everything that they need to do for the wedding.
Yeah, I thought that was good. I like the setting. I like everything felt right about that.
Very, very quick scene. And then we jump over to Nicodemus talking to John the Baptist, and the beautiful light streaming in from behind Nicodemus. I love this scene. And they're going back and forth a little bit, and John says, the Pharisees would have labeled Moses a lunatic for talking to a shrub. And Nicodemus is a little bit taken back by this, and he's like, do you consider yourself to be like Moses? Like trying to probe, like, who does John really believe he is? And then he kind of like, Nicodemus was maybe a little combative at first, but then he grabs the stool and sits down, takes off his what would you call his headdress or whatever?
Yeah, I don't know what that would even necessarily be called, but that was well designed. That was well directed. There's this whole interplay between them that I really appreciate. Like they are definitely frustrated with each other's worldviews and who each other is. They are definitely going back and forth. There's a couple moments where it's like, well, this is just going to fall apart. Nicodemus is just going to leave, and this is over. And yet they are compromising just enough that they can see each other. And I thought, man, this is actually kind of a cool model of like, there are other Christian worldviews, there are other political views, there are whatever that we just have a hard time even being in the same room with. And yet here are two people like they're trying just hard enough to hang on to each other in the conversation. And yet it's still, and yet part of the reason why it works between these two characters is they're not beating around the bush. Like they're very direct to each other. Like,
right.
I hate your frock.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. John confronts Nicodemus. He's like, your clothes could have fed 3 children in Nazareth for a month.
Yes. Yeah, this is not like a false, like I feel like in our culture we have like this false pseudo respect where we actually don't respect them at all, but we act like it's the decent thing to do. And yet this exchange is it's definitely direct, and they say how they feel, and yet it opens the door to like the clashing of the worldviews in a way that conversation can happen. It was, I don't even know what I'm trying to say with any of those notes, but I did make notes about that. I liked it.
And then, Nicodemus is saying like, hey, look, I'm not your captor. Rome is the one who put you in this prison. And then they have this back and forth, and John realizes like, oh, Nicodemus is not really here on official business. And Nicodemus says, yeah, I'm here of my own accord. I'm not here for anything else. I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's where John catches it, and he realizes, okay, I'm going to change my posture a little bit. Totally changes his tone, says, tell me from the beginning, tell me what's going on. I like that.
So then we see Eden pressing grapes, and it kind of lingered on that for just a few moments. And I, like, in that moment, I was like, oh, wow, that is like a lot of work. That does not look like it's a quick process at all.
And usually done by lots of other people. Like, as far as the wine press itself and how it operated was dead on, like, historically speaking. Perfect. It usually would not be done by, one lone wife at home. Like, you would have done that in the community with other people, 2 or 3 folks in the middle of that. And yet for the scene, they got to do that. And the whole thing, I mean, if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard us talk about the calling of a disciple. I don't know if he exactly gets to go home and have this conversation. It's not that it wouldn't have happened that way. Like, there's a possibility that when Jesus called his disciples, there were these kind of exchanges. We kind of have deconstructed and debunked that as we talked about it in session 3. But for the purpose of making the episode in the season here, for the art, I can appreciate what they're what they're having to accomplish by doing all this. So that was good.
Yeah, and they're in the area where they're going to be doing most of their ministry anyway. So it doesn't seem far-fetched to me that they would still see each other at some point.
Yeah. It's tricky to know.
So Simon does arrive, and he explains what happened, that there was no fish all night, and then they had this miraculous catch, and he talks about the moment when Jesus asked him to let down his net one more time, and he's like, look, I did it anyway because of the way he looked at me, and he like doesn't even quite understand how to explain it. And then he references, I love this, he references the Elijah and Elisha story, and Eden finishes the story because she knows her text so well.
Except she kind of butchers the story, and that's not a comment, but yeah, I mean, the whole thing is that he doesn't immediately sacrifice the oxen and burn. He actually tells Elijah, like, oh, really? And then Elijah's ticked off, and he's like, what have I done to you? And he leaves, and then Elisha, there was kind of this like, yeah, he immediately, sacrifices the oxen and follows him. And I'm like, it's kind of like not at all how the Jews understand the story, but hey.
Whatever. Okay. That's why we're all here. That's what we're doing this for.
But she does know her text, and again, for a woman in their culture, that's a thing that she knows her stories like that.
Especially if we think about like Bet Sefer, we think perhaps women were or girls were involved in Bet Sefer going through Torah, but then this story would have been in the rest of Tanakh that she wouldn't have been in school for. So, and
in a lot of circles, I think, like I even think of like the Nicodemus and Zahara setting, and I feel like in maybe a lot of settings, the wife would have just quietly like let the husband tell the story, like that's his job. I like Eden like jumping in there and engaging the story and saying, yeah, and this is what happens, and that was good. I like that.
So Simon gets pretty excited as he's telling Eden about how he was called and about who Jesus is. And Eden is overcome with emotion and seems upset to Simon. But actually she's thrilled. And she's like, look, of course he chose you. She's completely supportive, completely understanding of what's going on. And Simon's like, look, this isn't going to be easy.
When have we ever had anything easy? It's not our people's way.
And then Simon joins Eden in the grape press, and much flirting ensues. And it's a fun little scene for their relationship again. And also, one thing I noticed in this scene is that Simon is wearing tassels, and I don't think we've seen that before, right?
You've caught them every now and then if you've been watching. They're in there, and they're in quite a bit of this episode, actually, all over the place. When Jesus walks in to the wedding, on both garments that he's wearing, they've been in there if you're looking for them.
Well, I was talking about Simon specifically. Simon wasn't wearing them before this, right?
Yeah,
Or
I feel
was
like
he?
I've seen that. Yeah, I feel like I've seen them on him more than this one occasion.
Okay.
At least hints of them, but very prominent in that episode. The way that they actually come kind of out of his garment and hang there while he's sitting.
Yeah, and later in
With the blue thread.
right, and later in the episode, you see all of the disciples wearing them. So it seems like it's like, look, if you weren't wearing them now, you definitely are once Jesus calls you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I made a comment, what was it, last episode or the episode before, about how I really thought Eden was playing, in my perspective, the great image of an Etzer Kenegdo. Like, she really came after Peter and opposed him an episode or two ago when she confronted his lack of obedience and how he's running from God, and held her ground, still let Peter be him and let him be, responsible for the consequence of an oath, but still stood against him. And now you see like the full circle of that Etzer Kenegdo in this episode where she says, yes, like, I'm so happy that somebody, her line is, finally sees in you what I've always seen in you. Like, outside of Jesus, who would be the person that would call out that identity more than anybody else on the planet? It would be that. It'd be that spouse. And I love her both in one episode standing absolutely not against, like, opposing him with righteous opposition. And now on the other side going, yes, and this is why I stood my ground back there, is because this is also a part of who you are. And I loved that. That was good.
Yeah, for sure. So then we have Rama and Thomas. Rama, I don't know how you say that.
Uh-huh.
They're loading up the cart for the wedding feast. They seem to be like the caterers, and they're arguing about whether they're taking 3 or 4 jars of wine. And she's like, well, they paid for 3. And Thomas is like, well, I mean, we could take it out of, whatever. He says that they could cover it. And she says, well, that would completely eliminate all of your margin. And there's this like weird thing going on. And Thomas is like, well, aren't we a team? And like, is he thinking they would split the cost if they had to use it? Or I don't know. It seems like there's some kind of weird relationship going on there, and Thomas has a misunderstanding of what their relationship status is, and we don't really get any resolution to that. It seems like there's this awkward thing, pretty much the whole time about what their setup is.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think I've just assumed that I don't know if they're setting it up for later. It feels like there's a thing between Thomas and her, like romantic interest, but maybe I'm just assuming that based on everything else I've ever watched. But yeah, and again, another great instance of where I just appreciate how they came up with the backstory. They took a character that we have some, doubting Thomas, and they gave it a very realistic, a very plausible, believable personality and backstory, and another backstory that I really liked.
Yeah. So then we're back to Mary and Dinah preparing flowers. Dinah is singing the praises of her new daughter, talking about how great she is and how much they love her, and then she explains, but her parents, like, that's kind of a tense relationship that they have going on there. It seems like her family is much more well off, and that just is causing some interesting situations between their families.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Is this the same scene? I can't tell in my notes where Mary references her own wedding, or is that in another one?
Is that there? I don't remember. I don't think I made a note of it.
Wherever it shows up, I did appreciate that little tongue-in-cheek. Mary is reminiscing about her wedding, talking about how much different it was, and Dina's like, oh, like, why is it so different? And she's like, you remember, and she points to this pregnant belly, and I just thought, like, oh, yes, that was such a...
right.
I mean, that's exactly... what they would have grappled with.
Yeah.
The stigma, the cultural. Yeah. I like that.
That may have been in the next scene, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. So we have Simon and Andrew walking to meet Jesus. They're arguing about whether or not they should have brought lunch, how they're going to carry it, whether anyone else will have brought it, what they're going to do, which isn't really addressed directly later, but it does turn out like, oh, they found a nice fig tree, and so lunch is covered according to Jesus, and so they kind of give this look at each other, which is great. But Simon, he's like, we watched and learned from our father how to fish, and we just watched for a long time, and then we just did it, and we made our own mistakes. And Andrew's pretty nervous about everything, and Simon's trying to reassure him with this story, and the story keeps coming up throughout the episode. But then they come up to the other disciples, and Mary's there, and we have young James and John and Thaddeus, and then turns out Big James is up in the tree. He's the one bringing the figs down, and so they kind of have an introduction and deal with the multiple names, and which was interesting because Big James, who is kind of giving a more explicit name, like we don't really see anything else from him for the rest of the episode, so I'm assuming he's going to come up more later. But
well, they're going to take the more popular opinion that I have routinely stood against my own chagrin with all the emails I receive, that Big James is going to be the triumvirate son of Zebedee James, so he'll definitely be coming back. I did chuckle at how they worked in James the Just, because that will be the... is that right? Boy,
yeah.
See, I get so caught up in my own theory of who the Jameses are that now I'm all twisted.
Yeah, and it's it's definitely complicated. But yeah, Jesus says... like he asks like, what are we going to do with two Jameses? And the taller one says, well, what if I go by Big James? And he's like, that seems fine. And he turns to the other one, what do you think about that, young James? And he says, yeah, that seems fair to me. And Jesus remarks,
the sense of justice too, huh? And it's settled.
And that's a great play on, I mean, he will be called in the book of Acts, James the Just, is how the book of Acts, when he's martyred right before the Jerusalem Council, they call that James the Just. So I thought that was a great, just some more great tongue-in-cheek writing that wasn't overly cheesy, but just was fun.
So they head out for the wedding, and then we see Mary and Dina again, and they're inspecting the hoopah, and Mary's like, it's maybe a little crooked. And she's like, I think I know someone who can fix this. And Dina is like, no, this is fine. Like, we got what we paid for. Just let's get the flowers and we'll make it good. And then Hella comes in, and she says, I've Abner and Hella are the parents of the bride. And so she's like, yeah, I came here early so that we could select a table for our family. And Dina's like, well, isn't that up to the bride and groom? Like, they've kind of set this whole thing up, and maybe you can set your preferences aside. And she's like, well, it's not personal. Abner just likes things his way. And Dina says, like, maybe not a good idea. And she's like, yeah, for really important stuff, I think we can set aside our preferences. And she's like, well, I hope it's important enough. And so they exchange some more pleasantries, and then Hella turns and she's like, the hoop is pretty crooked.
Right. Yes.
And it really is. And everyone's noticing, and it's great.
And they did a good job portraying the tension between wealth and, like, I was even curious, like, okay, what's the backstory where, okay, what's the name of the wealthy father again?
Abner.
Abner. So I want to know the backstory of why he even let his son marry this, like
his daughter,
his son or his daughter marry the son of, this so unwell off family. Like, there's got to be a reason, because they portrayed that tension between, well, we're a really successful family, you guys are super poor, like, and that tension between that. So not that it's implausible by any stretch of the imagination, but I would love to know, the backstory. Is Abner just a sucker for does his daughter have him wrapped around his finger? Was there some, I would love to know. I'd love to know. We're not going to get told, but I'd love to know.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't really know much about the bride and groom. I don't know if they'll end up coming back later, but yeah, they're basically non-speaking parts, and we just see them briefly. So then we go back to Jesus walking with the disciples, and Simon kind of has this little like sparkle in his eye, and he runs up next to Jesus, and they're talking about going to the wedding and who's going to be at the wedding. And he's like, this seems like a good time. There's not going to be any Romans there. You could introduce us as your disciples. You could get some more disciples. Let's get this show on the road. And Andrew's like, do they even know how remarkable it is to have Jesus at their wedding? And Jesus is like,
Well, considering that I was the clumsy teenager who cracked my head open at Asher's when he was a child, I don't think he finds me remarkable.
which I thought was a great moment. And he's like, this is not my day. This is really about them. So that's not why we're going.
Yep. Great job.
So then we're back to Mary and Dina, and now they're putting flowers on the hoopah, and it actually is looking pretty good at this point. Covered in flowers. It doesn't really look like it's crooked. I don't know if they actually fixed it before they put the flowers on there or what they did. But it's looking good. And shooting a lot of weddings as a photographer, I can tell you that I haven't seen very many hoopahs, but I've seen displays like this where flowers are covering some sort of structure like this, and they are making it look way easier than it actually is. Like, this would take hours and hours and hours of work to do this. Even if all the flowers were like put together and they're just like attaching them to the structure, it would still take several hours. So I think while they don't actually get into it in the show, like the extravagance that they're putting into this, even as a poor family, to whatever extent they are poor, they're really like going all out for this.
They're doing everything they can to make up for all the things that they can't.
Yeah. And so Dina's feeling kind of insecure about everything. Mary's encouraging her, and then they start discussing Jesus and what he's been up to and where he's been working and his students. And Dina's like, well, I bet he's pretty handsome. And Mary's, like, like she's very, very proud of her son without like bragging on him too much. And one thing I noticed, because I was trying to like make sure I was spelling everyone's names right and making sure I was getting, because there's so many additional characters here, I was like, okay, I gotta get some help. So I turned on the subtitles for a few portions, and I noticed that they're capitalizing the pronouns for Jesus at this point. It's like, well, yes, but also like Dina doesn't know who Jesus is at this point. And like, does Mary even really understand that? But like across the board, they're capitalizing it through the whole episode. So obviously it's just like it's not about the character's understanding, but I do feel like it's kind of a weird, I feel like maybe they shouldn't have done it because, like, especially at this point, Jesus is not, like, he's not even in public ministry, let alone known to everyone about who he is. So anyway, just a comment that I had about the subtitles there.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think I would agree with that. I always find it interesting. It's somewhat unrelated that in most translations, they won't even capitalize the pronoun for God, because deciding who the pronoun is referring to is sometimes very interpretive. And is that he refer to God, or refer to the person speaking, or refer to some other character and some other subject, and so they just make the universal call to not capitalize it, because in doing so you make a huge interpretive leap. Now, that doesn't apply here because we're not translating and they know what they're trying to do with the dialogue, but it's always given me a lot of like great pause, like, okay, yeah. And I think there's even some editorial rules about when you capitalize. You're the editor, Brent. Isn't there a rule about typically you don't capitalize the he when referring to Jesus?
Well, it depends on how you're doing it. It's kind of a personal preference thing. For me, I think typically we're trying to like emphasize the Philippians 2 reality of like Jesus set his divinity aside and was approaching life as a man. And so a lot of times I would say probably don't want to capitalize it. You could switch back and forth whether you're like, okay, does Jesus have his God goggles on or not? If he does, I'm going to capitalize it. If he doesn't, then I won't. But yeah, it's really just a preference. I think it's pretty convenient in our modern context where I can talk to the person who wrote it and say, okay, who are you talking about here? And then it's actually nice because if you're talking about two people, you can go back and forth and have some pronouns capitalized and some not, and not have to use names every time. So it is kind of convenient from a writing sense and making sure that the reader understands who you're talking about.
Right.
But yeah, you could argue all day about it. So,
all right, well, let's stop then and keep on moving on.
So then Thomas and Rama arrive, and they have the wine. Rafi and Dina greet them. Rafi's Dina's husband, and they have Thomas again, with the like weird relationship that they have, Thomas gives this like really exquisite introduction to her mom about who she is and where she's from and what
the most beautiful winter.
Yeah.
And all. Yeah.
And then it turns out like that was unnecessary because Rafi is like best friends with her dad. So he already knows who she is, basically, I guess. I don't know. But they sample some of the wine. Dina is really impressed by it. And Rafi is like, okay, we're going into debt just to impress the in-laws here. So there's some more of that tension. And then Thomas asks like, hey, can we confirm it's 40 people, right? And they're like, they seem a little unsure, which is interesting. And then Jesus arrives with a whole crew of people, and Mary runs to greet him. The disciples walk in, they're all wearing tassels. This is where I noticed that. But yeah, like this is where that, like, they were talking about, are we going to have enough wine? And they're like, yeah, this is what they ordered. I'm sure it'll be fine. And we're starting to see the sense like, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be a problem.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting earlier when Mary asked Dina, "Is it okay that Jesus brings people?" And there was just like no hesitation.
Yeah, right.
Culture of hospitality. Like, of course, he can bring whoever he wants. Like there was no like, like even a briefest pause of like, well, of course. Do you have any idea how many he's bringing? Like there was just like, yeah, absolutely, Jesus can bring whoever. Hospitality, and I thought that was very fitting for their culture.
Yeah, exactly what you would expect out of it. So then we're back to Nicodemus, and he's explaining the miracle that he saw with Mary and the demons, and then John like kind of starts to click for John, like, oh, this really was a miracle, and there's only one person who could have done this, and so he's getting excited because he realizes Jesus' time is near. He starts quoting all the scripture, and Nicodemus snaps back at him like,
"Don't quote Solomon to me, you wild mongrel."
Like, wow, that's a line.
Yeah, there was great interaction with that. And the scripture quoting, like, could have been way out of hand. Obviously, if anybody's listened to my podcast, they know it's probably not my favorite reasoning scripture usage there, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been either. And it was I was okay with it. It was plausible. I'll allow it.
Yeah, and then John continues on and quotes some more and gets Nicodemus to finish what he's saying, and then Nicodemus is like, "You are careless with Torah. God does not have a son except Israel." And that felt like a much more like the first one. Don't quote Solomon to me, you wild mongrel. That was more irritation, more like, I'm better than you. And I think he kind of stepped back, and now he's like, I mean, it's still a very, very strong statement. You're careless with Torah. Like he's not mincing his words, but at the same time, it felt much more, not as much reactive as the first one. And just like, okay, this is very serious and we need to take this seriously.
Yeah. And throughout this whole little mini scene here, and I know you're not done, but there's just a great depiction of a dissonance. Like they're just not quite speaking the same language. They're having a conversation about the same God, but they're not working with the same puzzle pieces, and they're not trying to put together the same, puzzle at the end. And even at the end of this scene, he starts talking about light and darkness, which I loved because it's such Essene talk.
Yeah.
Sons of light and sons of darkness. Which one are you going to be, Nicodemus? Which is like, for Nicodemus, like Pharisees don't have any talk about sons of light and sons of, like, what does he care? So there's like this dissonance and yet this engagement, and yet I can't even believe they depicted that so well. Like, yeah, I was just totally shocked that they used Essene language for John the Baptist, which is just so beautiful and brilliant and perfect.
Uh-huh.
And then this Pharisee, like, I want the pure, unadulterated. Like, it was so well done, so well done.
Yeah. John says, I wonder if you're going to awaken, or if you love the dark too much. And I'm like, whew.
Yeah.
And then Nicodemus leaves on that note.
Yeah.
So then we're back to the wedding. Thomas is giving directions to the servants about the food. We see...
Which, by the way, I'm going to pause right here. Because of our conversation that we had with Portia, I noticed in this episode, it's probably been in there throughout, this is one episode where I started to notice in the crowd and the people at the wedding, there is a good amount of racial diversity That's not just racial, but like what I would imagine historically accurate racial diversity in the characters that are depicted. At the same time, the servants were still very dark-skinned individuals, and which would have been historically accurate. Like there was, even in those days, an exploitation of. I just think of our conversation we had weeks ago with Portia, Brent, and I think, like, I saw some of those things here, and maybe Jesus and the disciples are making maybe the filmmakers here are taking a step in the right direction. Like they are looking more Middle Eastern. They're still pretty pale. Like if we really examine the characters that are at play here with Jesus and the Havarah, it's a step in the right direction. It's still not there yet. And yet throughout the wedding, I at least appreciated having talked with Portia and hearing her story and looking for representation. And I'd love to even hear, maybe sometime I'll get to ask her how she felt about Chosen season 1 if she saw it. And those representations, at least there was all kinds of different people at this wedding coming from different places. The characters, they just, you could tell that they had different backgrounds, and there was a diversity to it that I think I have been missing when I think of past depictions of the life of Christ, which is very monotone, very bland, usually pretty Anglo-European centric casting.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we see the wedding party, everyone's singing, dancing. Rama's out there, and she's seems to be counting people. And then she runs in and explains to Thomas, like, oh, we have a few more people. It's like, yeah, I know. They always have more people than you expect. I planned for that. And she's like, no, the count is up to 80. And he kind of freaks out. And, they have this tense moment like, oh, I told you we should have brought that fourth jar. And then he realizes he probably shouldn't have said that in that moment. And he's like, well, 3 jars is enough for 60. And so it's like, oh man, they already know they have a problem, and like everything is just starting. So the song finishes, and they say a blessing for the wine, the first of many times we're going to hear this blessing. And then Thomas is like talking to the servers, and he's like, hey, look, just pour it 3/4 full. And if they make any comments about it, say, oh yeah, okay, sorry, I'll be right back. But then you don't go back.
And I don't want to correct you, Brent Billings, but it's actually the second time we've heard that blessing.
Oh, it is.
Because Dina uttered the blessing when she tasted the wine.
Oh, you're right.
Earlier. Yeah. Okay, good.
So the second of many times that we'll hear that blessing. So the banquet master comes in, and he's like, hey, everybody seems to be having a good time, but the servants are kind of weird. What's going on with that? And Thomas, they just totally flatter the guy. They're like, look, you're the best banquet master we've ever seen. Don't even worry about it. And he's like, huh. And he just kind of wanders away. And then Rama's like, well, I've got an idea. So then we cut out, and it's Rafi and Dina. They're thanking guests for coming. And then it seems like maybe some of the guests have already come, and they're on their way out. But then Abner and Hela arrive at that point. And then Abner kind of pauses awkwardly for a really long time. And he's like, you know what? This is the best party I've been to in a while. And then it seems like maybe he's already a little bit drunk at this point. I'm not quite sure if that's what they're going for. You get that impression.
Yeah, he's a little, I get the feeling he's a little buzzed.
But he goes in and overshares. He's like, I wasn't always impressed with what was going on around here. And I've been, I've been super successful, and your family hasn't been, but maybe that's made my family too arrogant. And then he kind of trails off, and then he looks up at the hoopah, and he's like, that doesn't actually look crooked to me at all. And like Rafi and Dina are just the whole time, they're just like smiling and nodding, and they're just handling the tension with total grace. And I loved it.
Yep.
So then we're back with the Rama, and they have the jars with the purification water. And she's like, well, we could do this. And Thomas is like, that's not really a good idea. Like, word's going to spread on that. It's going to make the family look bad. It's going to make us look bad. He's like, well, maybe we could figure out something else. We could feed them something that's going to make them ask for water specifically instead of wine. So they're fishing around for ideas here, and haven't quite come to anything that seems like is going to work for them yet. So then we continue into a montage of the whole party. Like considering this family is apparently poor, this party looks completely extravagant. The tables have all sorts of stuff. There's so many guests there. And, we move into the evening. They've got all these candles. Jesus is playing games with the kids, which is a great callback to a couple episodes ago. And then the disciples are off to the side at their own table, and they're discussing Jesus, and they're thinking about like, well, what was it like to be a kid again? And Mary's like, well, the thing about being a kid is they all have to go home tonight, but we all get to go with Jesus wherever he's going. And we don't quite know where that is yet. Andrew's maybe a little bit concerned about that. Simon brings up his story about watching their father again, and Mary's like, well, maybe we'll just watch him forever.
Yeah, that was a great line, because you immediately have this. Yeah, you immediately sense the obvious, like, well, it's not going to be forever. There is going to come a time where you're going to have to actually respond. But I love that line. We're like, yeah, of course we'll just watch him forever, and it will not be that long.
Yeah, Mary's portrayal in this scene is particularly interesting to me, because in some senses, like, she's already had this incredibly life-transforming experience with Jesus, and she's kind of known what he's capable of longer than anyone else, and so she has this like level of wisdom about who Jesus is and what he's doing and what he's going to be able to do that maybe the other disciples don't quite have. But then she also has this like naive view of a child, like, oh yeah, this is perfect, this is just what it's going to be like forever or whatever. So I thought that was an interesting balance.
Yeah, she has a good mix of confidence and humility at the same time, in what she knows and what she's confident of and how she holds it with others. It's been really nice.
So then Andrew leaves to get some more wine, and so then Simon is musing like, you know what, I don't even understand why I'm here. Usually the students choose the rabbi, which I was like,
love it.
There we go.
Love it. Yep.
And then and Thaddeus, or rather James, is like, yeah, I wasn't a student before either. Thaddeus told me about him, and Thaddeus is like, well, I met him on a construction job, and Mary's like, well, yeah, he's not a professional rabbi. He's been doing other stuff up to this point. And Jesus told Thaddeus that he's building a kingdom stronger than stone. They were doing some stone work on their job, and Simon's like kind of poking and prodding, like, well, what were you guys building? And Thaddeus is a little embarrassed to say, and he's like, well, we can't really talk about it in front of a woman. And then Mary's like,
I have seen and heard things that would turn your blood to ice.
And then Simon starts to like figure out what Thaddeus is talking about, but then he realizes that Mary's talking about ice. And I was like, would they even have ever seen ice? They do talk about it getting cold at night, but would they? I don't know. Like, what is the knowledge of ice in the first century?
Oh yeah, sure. Not ice maybe in all the ways that we experience it, but I mean, Jerusalem gets snow. Yeah, you definitely would have had ice in there.
Okay.
In their world.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
Yep.
My experience is from August so I do not have a concept of ice in Jerusalem.
A couple times in the last decade, they've been building snowmans on the old Temple Mount and throwing snowballs. The rabbis have, so it's been fun pictures.
Oh man.
Did I just say pictures? Pictures. There you go. I've been getting enough garbage about that I'm going to have to start fixing that. Photographs.
Hey, do whatever you have to do, I guess, huh?
Look at this photograph.
Let's see, where were we? So, I thought this was a great little detail. Like Thaddeus says, he was working on the retaining wall, and Jesus was building a ramp so that anyone who couldn't walk very well would be able to get into. It was a restroom facility. And then Simon's like, well, why didn't he just heal those people? And so this is where they're talking about like, the previous miracles that he's done for us, those are private. Jesus isn't really like out in the open yet with his miracles. And they're just trying to figure out like who Jesus is, what he's about, and what he's doing. And you definitely get this sense like, I mean, Simon is really pushing for everything to get moving full speed right now, yesterday, really. And everyone else is like, maybe let's let him go at his own pace. He's the rabbi, and Simon's, I love that portrayal of Simon. He's definitely like very eager.
I like the theological discussion that they were just having. It sets up all the future discussions they're going to have, because you get this. They have opinions, they got convictions. Like, this is the right way to view Jesus. No, what do you? And at this point, they're not like arguing violently, but there's definitely like these like they all had these like, ho hum, this is my story. Hey, this is, and then you start talking about like who Jesus is and what the point is. And there was a lot more like direct, well, this is what it is. And I just like how that was starting to feel with the group.
Yeah. So then the banquet master announces the dance of Miriam. And I'm assuming that's a big deal, because it seems like they're making a big deal about it. I haven't been to any Jewish weddings. At this point in the episode, I think my wife was like, we really got to watch Fiddler on the Roof, which I have not seen yet. So,
oh goodness, Brent Billings. I'm glad we didn't have that in the application process to come be my co-host.
I know. I intended to watch it before I went on the Israel trip in 2016, and then never did, and still have yet to do so. So
well, we'll give you a pass for a while.
I know. I got to do it. So anyway, so then Jesus, another great little moment that's just like, there's no explanation for this, but you see Jesus walking around the corner, and he turns back to finish whatever conversation. He says, watch out for the frogs this time. It's like, what in the world is he talking about? But like, he's having a great time. And Simon and Andrew walk up to him, and they're like, hey, Song of Miriam's happening. And then they have this conversation about Andrew having 4 left feet, which didn't really seem to play out for me, because it seemed, they don't really show his footwork later, but it seems like he had no problem dancing later on in the episode when they actually got to it. But then Mary runs up, Mary, his mother, and it's like, hey, they've run out of wine. And he's like, well, okay, what are you telling me for? And she's like, we can't let Asher's family be humiliated. And so Jesus kind of dismisses his disciples and pulls Mary aside, and it's like, look, my time has not yet come. And then we get the payoff from the beginning. And Mary says, if not now, when? And again, she does the almost fourth wall break and says, please. And I don't know if there's anything to it, but in the first shot, she was looking to the left side of the screen. In this one, she's looking to the right side of the screen. So I don't know if they were trying to communicate some kind of change in their relationship where, like, oh, Jesus has grown up, he's on the other side of whatever. I'm probably reading way too much into that, but I was curious about that fourth wall break, and I went back and looked at each of those scenes and realized that Mary was looking a different direction each time.
Huh, that's very interesting. I did love the see, as I read John, and we didn't do a whole bunch of stuff on John, I think what's happening at the wedding is I think Jesus and Mom are having a pretty major text throwdown. When Jesus says, my time hasn't come, it's essentially the exact same phrase, but in the it's the opposite of what Jacob says about Leah and Rachel. My time has come was the phrase in the Hebrew when he's trying to get married to the wife that he wants. And Jesus says, my time hasn't come at a wedding, to which Mary responds with a phrase that's lifted directly out of Joseph in the very next part of the next cycle of the Genesis tale. I think they're having a text throwdown, and it's more than just a mother-son moment of like, pretty please, but there's actually like a very a Mary who knows her text, which we know she does from the Magnificat and Luke. Like, she knows her Bible. And I think she's meeting Jesus word for word, text for text, and saying, now, having said that, having made that point, what they did in the episode was excellent. And I loved that moment, that second, fourth wall break that you're referring to, because you get this real intimate sense of Mom, like the power that Mom has with her son. And I think we Protestants work so hard at not being Catholics that we miss this beautiful, unique relationship between Mary and Jesus. Like, we're working so hard to not venerate Mary that we do ourselves a huge disservice. And I loved the way it communicated that in this episode.
Yeah, and that kind of, it's not quite pleading, but just like, yeah, you can't make a request like that without the relationship. So I think it just really illustrates like how strong their relationship is.
Yep, absolutely.
So then, after she has her moment with Jesus, she just turns around and says to Thomas and Ramah, like, do whatever he tells you.
Right.
So then they take him in and show him the purification jars, and he's like, okay, fill them with water. And then Thomas has all these questions. Ramah's like, just go with it, okay? And Thomas continues to bring the questions, and Ramah is like, well, okay, I guess she decides like, oh, he's going to do whatever he's going to do. He's going to ask the questions, but meanwhile, we're going to get to work. So she and all the other servants start to go get water. And then Jesus says, this is kind of how it is sometimes, Thomas. You can't always explain everything. And it seems like, I don't know why Jesus would have known Thomas's name at that point, as far as the episode is concerned. And so when Jesus says Thomas's name, I feel like that's the part that really caught him off guard, is that Jesus knew his name.
I didn't even think about that. I didn't catch that, but you might be right. And if that's what they're doing in the episode, that makes sense. I would say it's actually really plausible in the way that Jesus Havara ended up working, that they all knew each other. I feel like all 12 of these people had really prior connections. That's not playing out in the episodes of The Chosen necessarily, but historically speaking, he absolutely could have known his name. But I didn't catch that in the episode. That's good. That's good. Good eye.
Yeah. So then Jesus asked Thomas to join him, and he says, I'm going to teach you a new way to count and measure. And it's kind of the parallel to Andrew and Simon, where he says, I'm going to teach you a new way to fish for something else. So then we're back to Abner, and he is kind of messing around with his food and his glass of wine, and he realizes that he's out of wine. So he calls for Dinah, and the banquet master comes over, and he's like, yeah, where is everybody? Why aren't they serving? And then Mary comes running up. Like, nothing has happened at this point. She doesn't know anything about what Jesus is doing. She doesn't know, what the progress is on this. And she comes up and she's like, look, the wine's coming. Don't worry about it. Like, she has total confidence in her son, which I thought was great. So then Mary Magdalene and Thaddeus are talking, and they're talking about like, what did you did you do the same thing that your father did? And he's like, well, my father was a smith. But every man must leave his father, right? And he talks about how he got into cutting stone instead, and he likes how cutting stone is this, like, there's this finality to it. And, when you're working with iron, you can recast it into something else. You just got to heat it back up. But with stone, everything is more permanent. And then as he's saying this, they kind of overlay the images of Ramah and the servants pouring water in the jars. And then Jesus asks everyone to step outside of the room. And Thomas kind of hesitates for a second. And Jesus is like, no, it's just for a moment. Don't worry. So then Thaddeus' story continues. He says, with stone, once you begin working with it, you can't stop. Like, once you've started, the process is in motion and there's no going back. You can't put the stone back together. And Jesus is stepping towards the jars, and he looks up and he says, I'm ready, Father. We see him sweating. He places his hands on the jars, and then he dips his hand in, and wine is just dripping down through his fingers. And he smiles, and he steps out of the room and says, go draw some wine, take it to the banquet master. And they go in. Ramah goes in. Thomas stands there and waits. Ramah goes in with the servants, and then you hear all this cheering from inside, and Jesus kind of smirks, and yeah, it's great.
Yep.
Then we're on to Rafi talking to Asher, and Dina's talking to Mary. Rama comes out, and Abner comments like, oh, it's about time they're back out here. The banquet master drinks, and then he calls for the music to stop. And I thought this was kind of an interesting way to do it, because in the text, actually, it says that he went to does he go to the couple, or does he go to the parents or something? But it's more of a private moment in John 2, whereas in the episode, he says like, whoa, hold on, everybody stop the music, everybody listen up. And he, explains like, look, they always serve the best, and then they give you the cheap stuff, like whatever. And so, but this is the best wine I've ever tasted. So let's thank them for this unnecessary but honorable gesture. And he blesses the wedding, the marriage, and God, and they drink. And Rafi looks at Dina like, this really is that good. And Abner drinks, and he stares at the cup and like just frozen. And Hella asks what's wrong, and he's like, I was wrong. And then Mary looks at Jesus and they kind of nod in this understanding way. And then we're back with Thomas and he's just staring at the jars in total disbelief.
Yeah, great moments. I did love that line went from Avner about, she asks, is there something wrong? And his exact line is,
Yes, I was.
with this perfect pause. And it just wonderful. Well done. The design of it, the whole stone cutter thing. Once you strike the stone, you set in motion a series of decisions, and just really well done. Another really, really well written scene.
And I don't know if we're going to see Abner and Hela again later on in another episode, but I definitely feel like, oh, he had a moment. Like his whole life probably isn't going to change, but he definitely has a new understanding about like, okay, I need to stop making harsh assumptions about everyone because I can be wrong sometimes, which is great. So Simon is like, okay, Jesus, we've got the fish, we've got the wine, what's next? And Jesus is like, I don't know. And Simon says, well, I'll go with you to the ends of the earth. And he says, I hope so, but we first have to deal with Andrew's weird 4 left feet problem. So they start dancing and Andrew like just starts dancing. Like it doesn't really seem like they play that problem out. Seems like he's having a great time. We see Abner and Rafi dancing together, the two dads of the bride and groom. And then they make a comment, like Andrew's dancing is apparently bad. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see it being bad.
But even Jesus' miraculous power can't help.
Yeah. Some things even I cannot do, which is a great, great little moment. So then Thomas and Ramah are looking at Jesus at the end of the party. Everyone's pretty much leaving for the night. And Ramah's like, he gave us even more than we needed. This was amazing. We can't pretend that we didn't see a miracle. And Thomas is like, well, look, and this was interesting. I thought I'm not quite sure. Again, this relationship between Thomas and Ramah, I'm not sure about, because Thomas says he invited me to join him, but he wants us to meet him in Samaria in 12 days. And so I just like, is she supposed to, I don't understand how the relationship works.
Well, the us would be a reference to the Havara, the disciples.
Oh, okay.
How I heard that. He asked me to follow him and he wants us, the disciples, those that have been invited to meet him in Samaria.
Okay. That makes more sense because it didn't seem like in the previous conversation between Jesus and Thomas that Ramah was part of it at all. But at the same time, like she was completely on board with him. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see her show up as one of his followers, even if not, one of the 12 formally. We see Mary is definitely a disciple, even though not one of the 12. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Ramah, but I don't know. We'll see. But Thomas is like, I don't know what to think. And she says, well, maybe for once in your life, don't think. And that's the end of our episode.
Yeah. Well, there were some great moments there towards the end. The thank you from Mary as the wedding and the dancing. You see Mary kind of mouth thank you to Jesus. Thank you for doing this. And it was one of those moments, like you said, how much does Mary know or not know? And that was a great moment of like, she doesn't even know, like she's thanking Jesus. And yet in the context, she's just asked him to set in motion the chain of events that will lead to his death. So she's saying thank you. She's so full of joy and gratitude, and yet has this ignorance of what's even begun because of that moment, which I thought was really good. Just the whole wherever he goes conversation with Thomas. And I love just the way they're depicting this. This is so not your official, formal, typical full-time rabbi disciples gig. Everything about this is weird. Jesus has this, not that rabbis wouldn't have had part-time jobs but there would have been very popular rabbis that didn't have to do that. Here's Jesus. He's got this rogue outfit. He's got this rogue band of people that aren't even students. Everything's upside down. You got a stone cutter. You got a couple of fishermen. You got a handful of fishermen. You got Mary. You got Thomas. And just this, I love how they're depicting just this collusion of different characters. And I just feel like there's something so instructive for us if we can watch and appreciate that part of these episodes, because I think we operate so much more like the Pharisees Like the synagogue, like we have systems, we have the way it's supposed to go. We have Bible college, we have seminary, we have all these things that's just how you do it. This is just the right thing to do. And the thing that Jesus did was not that. Like, it was not that. It was something else. And you get that sense as you watch this. There's something far less formal. There's something that's a little bit ragamuffin about what's going on. And I just really, I feel like we need to be, if there's something that this series can remind us about here, especially in season 1, I'm being reminded of that aspect of the kingdom of God. It kind of colors outside the lines. And by kind of, I mean a lot. Like it spends a lot of time outside the normal. And I hope we can be reminded of that.
Yeah, it's great. Well, with that jam-packed episode, man, that I feel like that episode did a lot of work.
It did. It had a lot of stuff going on.
So much going on. For a single event, it's just basically the wedding, but man, so much is happening. So it was great episode to talk about. If you want to get a hold of Marty, you can find him on Twitter at Marty Solomon. I'm at EIBCB. Go to BamaDiscipleship.com for details about the show in general. Check out our episode show notes. Hopefully you're watching the episodes along with us. So thanks for joining us on the Bama podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.